Hi, Chris. Hi, Sebastian. How are you both doing?
Very well. Great to be back. Seems like 2 seconds ago I was on last time.
This is definitely the fastest second visit to the scoop anyone has ever done. And yeah, so you survived COP. You're back, and obviously you're the man of the hour when it comes to carbon removals at COP. So there's a lot to get through in the next half hour. Um,
Sure.
may, Maybe just to start with something like you've been to, I think, 5 COPs. Um, this obviously you were in with a very different hat. So
Yeah.
overall, like, how was this experience compared to the other 4? I guess for you
Totally
personally.
different. Yeah. I mean, my first one was COP16. I was a ragtag activist with a sign, no chance of getting into any zone, let alone the blue one. And then in more recent years, more trying to, build that profile for CDR kind of more on the outside. With CDR at COP. Didn't go to Baku last year. It was the first one I missed in a while. This one I was really kind of on the inside because the climate champions, their role was to work hand in glove directly in support of the presidency and the development of the action agenda. So very different perspective. And now in hindsight, by 72 hours, it was an amazing experience. I mean, it just was really absolutely worth it. Yeah, I learned an enormous amount.
So, tell us, was it a win for CDR? Was it a loss for CDR?
Yeah, I think it was
Did you?
definitely a win. Yeah. I mean, I was involved in the action agenda. So for people who are new to COP, there's kind of roughly speaking kind of two sides of COP. There's the negotiated outcomes, which is really the delegations coming and hashing out, sort of new facets of Paris Agreement and even some legacy things prior to Paris. And then the action agenda, which came out of Paris as well, is evolved over time, and that used to be just sort of highlighting of voluntary efforts that were being done by the private sector, but it's become actually more and more substantive. And this year was really quite different because it really was linked to the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, and was this just incredibly collaborative process of developing these plans to accelerate solutions that are supposed to have an impact within the next 3 to 5 years, and shunned long-term commitments entirely, as a matter of course. So yeah, it was that was the kind of part I was in the action agenda. This was a very action agenda heavy one. And for the first time ever, we got carbon removal formally incorporated into the action agenda, into two parts of it directly, in the agriculture and land restoration key objective, as well as the decarbonization of difficult to abate sectors. So that was amazing. Like, it got us a seat at the adult table, I think, and hopefully we will stay there for good.
Can you make that really specific? These 2 places where CDR is now featured. Um, what does that mean? How is it featured? Yeah,
Yeah.
give
Well,
us the examples.
there's many layers to it, as you would know, both of you would understand. It's just important to be in the field of vision, to be able to be talked about without any sort of, qualifications or hiding, that, carbon removal is part of it. So it's an amazing platform. And the action agenda was broken up into these 6 major axes, and then the next level below were these 30 key objectives, and each one had a secretariat and 20 organizations that were invited to participate in it. So it was this very big architecture to it. And so where CDR directly did, although other things happened in other areas that are, I think, good for CDR, in key objective number 2, that was the low and zero carbon for difficult to abate industries. And then in key objective 8, which was land restoration and sustainable agriculture, there were, what materialized out of this are these 2 what are called solutions. That was first, like, identifying this is a thing we have to do. So that was first win. And so we got carbon removal listed just as this is a solution. This is part of the solutions that we need to pursue in both. But more importantly, then there are what are called plans to accelerate solution, which are jointly developed by members of that activation group, that are meant to be, these are actions we are taking concretely that will have an impact between now and the next global stocktake, 3 years, or by the end of the decade. And so we got 2 initiatives, one for each of them, and I can explain those, specifically, but that's what it meant in terms of carbon removal being there. And there was a lot more talk about carbon removal this year. The tone has really changed around it. I think because of the 1.5C budget, it's not the love whose name we dare not speak anymore.
Hmm. But let's follow this thread and understand like what are then the specific actions, like what happens now.
Sure.
Carbon removal is mentioned in these two areas. What does it mean in practice? What happens now during the next year, I guess?
Yeah.
And how exactly is that feeding into the global stocktake? Because you mentioned that the action agenda is now tied to it, but the global stocktake, the formal process, I mean, it gave a very, very general output that there's not much to do with. So tell us more.
Yeah, and again, I think that, for me, when I started at the Climate Champions in April, I think I mentioned this last time I was on, is that the goal was to not have it be a separate thing. The fact that it's not mentioned a lot in the global stocktake, if you really look at the more granular level of it, it's like, okay, well, this is a solution that fits into other parts of the global stocktake. And I had to test that out in very practical terms to get this to where it needed to be to have these outcomes. And people were understanding that, which I think is victory, number one. These solutions, too, being put forward are to be tracked as we go forward at each COP and in between. And there was an overwhelming support from all parties in Belém that this is a great way to do the action agenda. This is the way we should do it. And that was also a really good victory. So we have a good sense there'll be continuity. But to give you specifically what these were, I'll start with the one that's the more defined, ready to go program. And that's the one in agriculture, which we lobbied for, had amazing support from our team internally to make the case. And that is the Global Carbon Harvest Coalition. This is bringing together Brazil, India, and Kenya with CGIAR, IAR, the Global Agricultural Institution, to commit to getting methodological approval fully for SOC, soil organic carbon, ERW, and biochar in the next 3 to 5 years, by working together to scale up their research and data collection and have a joint sort of research program. And there'll be other country members that are joined to that as well. And then to work together on MRV. And there's actually an X Prize that's specifically going to be embedded around agricultural MRV for these 3 solutions that will be impaneled by ministry representatives and hopefully observers from PACM and other, compliance things. So it's about like, let's really, really speed this up. And then you can see that evolving into something once the science is resolved. This is a way to best policy practices. This is making deals maybe around Article 6. It becomes a zone for taking these things really, really seriously. And so that's fully funded. It's got 3 awesome members. All the people were, and we're moving on that like right now. So that's the first one. But I could pause there if you have any questions about that, then I can explain the second one.
Awesome. I'd love more of these examples. I think that's super useful.
Yeah. So that one I'm thrilled about. And it happened so quick, and it was a great example of how you use a COP as a focal point to make a thing happen. You know what I mean? And that's sometimes lost in the big headlines. Oh, we didn't get this thing out of negotiations. You have to realize there's a sociology of COP as well that is really important in terms of impact. The other one has a very different goal in mind. And this was really more about planting a flag for CDR in the heart of the COP, getting it into the action agenda to create an expectation on major action in the near term, not just the long term. And so that was what we called the CDR Mutirao, which that was the word that was, kind of an animating word in COP about all hands lifting things together, and urgency. That was the other part of it. So we said, well, let's take that spirit of COP30 and just transport it right into CDR and say, we need that for CDR. So we got the group of negative emitters to come in to the process. They nominated it, and then we worked on it really over a 2-month period of time. And the goal there, we said, we need to get a shorter term implementation target for CDR. Not just this distant science one, which are hugely useful, but that just, the effects of that. It doesn't animate people to do it, right? And so there we kind of drew on, without getting anything too formal, the CEM-MI goal, 100 megatons by 2030, the breakthrough one from COP27, and then the Mind the Gap one for the Energy Transition Commission. So we're sort of playing with those, but the more important part is just putting an ambitious goal for 2030, because that provokes a very, very different kind of behaviors. So that was one. The other part was to say, we know from so much experience, this is right out of Greg Nemeth, but we've all experienced it, is if you're bringing actors or peers within the same sector or group together to learn, that accelerates things. So you'll have the pioneers teaching the sort of the newbies, You get a more shared sense of what ambition should look like. And so we said, let's create these fora or launch pads that one for building demand from voluntary, private sector demand. That's one. And then the other one is policy, both for national and subnational. And then the third one is industry integration of CDR, and have each one headed by an apex organization to get on track to actually produce more deliverables by COP30, 31, and then every subsequent year. So it's creating a space for us that will last, that we can report against within COP. That was the goal of it. And so it's a much broader kind of changing the direction of things, where the first one is a very specific program.
What I would like to know is, so you're describing quite tangible things here, which is great. Like compared to how other solutions were taken forward, is CDR looking like a success story, or this is just the regular way also others approached their technological solutions? Does it stand out in any way, or is it kind of a typical way how these different action elements were taken are going to be taken forward in the next year?
Oh my God, there were so many of them. I was the co-facilitator of the Carbon Markets and Carbon Accounting Group, which also had interesting things that came out indirectly or directly related to CDR. It was a total mix. It was like there was like hundreds of these plans that came out, which was so awesome. The Brazilians like, is anybody going to do this? And they did. And so I think the story of COP, the action agenda, will require a lot of tracking of these different, plans. Some of them are really impressive with real money behind them, new partnerships forged, but we won't quite know what the impact is. It's going to take a little bit of time. And now hopefully every COP becomes a way of adding new of those and reporting back results from the ones that were set up in Belém. But yeah, there was a mix. There was new partnerships formed. I think the CDR Muchirai one was clever. If you could cut CDR off from the popular, very animating spirit of COP30 and sort of graft some of that into CDR, that was sort of the goal. I do think that seemed to have worked.
And I saw that obviously there was a lot of disappointment with the final declaration because of the emission of fossil fuels, deforestation roadmap, all of that. A lot of positive news around the action agenda. So a lot of the examples you mentioned, right? Like kind of real money on the table. And when I read the accelerating carbon removals part in the action agenda, again, what stood out to me was first, obviously, these targets that you had, kind of the 100 megatons for durable removals, 3 gigatons for nature-based. My first question was like, yeah, okay, 100 megatons sounds ambitious, feasible if people really get behind it today. How will we track? Like, what's the process for tracking both these 3 launch pads, but also this target over the coming year or years?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our partners on this is the State of CDR report, which is great.
Nice.
And so when we reached out to them, we're like, we need to have these little insight cutouts where we can we make that 2030 a meaningful target, and we can track that, and you get input from CDR FYI, from you guys. But they can be the sort of the secretariat or whatever. That's the wrong word. Sorry, guys. I don't want to give you a title we did not agree to. But just having them in there, given what they bring to the table, to like be able to, track this, and not only track how much we're getting towards it, but, really taking the kind of, again, the Greg Nemeth, the historical innovation things about where are we relative to other types of industries that had to go, you know what I mean? So to keep us on track about like through the rear view mirror of other precedents in addition to the raw numbers. So they'll play a role as will others. I mean, I see all the policy CDR groups to be able to do tracking for, okay, how many new policies do we have? What do are they general? Are they sector specific? So it'll be a real muchirao in that way. And I like that we have these 3 buckets. WBCSD is really, really well positioned, as given their membership, with support from some other orgs to do this really well. We're still looking for that industry one, though, to have some Apex org to come in, because there's a lot of interested parties, but nobody's like, all right, we'll pick that up, And then one other thing I'll say, Sebastian, is we want to have a thing by the time we get to London Climate Week, where we're doing some education right now through multiple channels. We're sort of sketching out the architecture in an exciting way about exactly what does it mean to be a member of these. But can we have it when we get to London Climate Week, which is like between the COPs? Can we select for those ones that seem to have really popped, that have legs, and then move towards how do we help them implement and get to a point of readiness where they can make an announcement at the next COP so we have a greater, grander thing. You know, I mean, that's the way we're sort of looking at the timetable for it. But it'll be pretty high touch. I mean, we have to see what people agree to, but we have a lot of ideas on the table in terms of what the actual form these fora will take.
Well, we're at the halfway mark, and I thought it would be good to also cover a bit on what happened in the formal COP agenda, which I was following. So maybe I'll share some thoughts, kind of adding to all this great and very actionable news that came out of the action agenda to what we see when it comes to CDR from the formal negotiations, and then we can try to tie it all together. So typically, when I follow the negotiations, there tend to be 3 agenda items where CDR might come up. Article 6, very common, right? The markets. Mitigation work program, where, I mean, it has been mentioned before, but I don't think ever really in the text. And then the global stocktake, where again, it has kind of featured in draft text at some point. And the challenge is, I think, and Chris explained it really well before, is that removals are, you know, they're implicitly parts of the whole Paris Agreement temperature goal, because you cannot get to the point where you balance emissions, and removals, or you cannot get to net zero without removals. But at the same time, we don't really have that many explicit references to removals in practice when you look at the negotiations. So there is one agenda item where removals very specifically were on the table, and not surprisingly, that's Article 6.4, or Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, where removals obviously came up in the context of the non-permanence and reversal standards, on which we have done episodes twice already. One in the past with Danny Collenworth, who is a member of the methodological expert panel, and he spoke in his personal capacity, and later on with the supervisory body member Olga Gastanzadeh, who also spoke in her personal capacity. And this has been very controversial standard, right? Because of the way it tackles specifically nature-based removals. And this came up yet again. But there was a lot of kind of, emotions around it, but in the end, nothing really happened. It's just mentioned the decision that, okay, this standard has been adopted. There is no additional guidance despite everything that happened. And then we had the question around term limits of the supervisory body members, and I think there were also questions around how long are the methodological expert panel members in their positions. I mean, we know that some of these questions came because supervisory body members themselves were concerned that there are not that many experts to go around, and if they cannot stay in this role for longer, how to guarantee that there is knowledge in these roles. But at the same time, we also know that many stakeholders involved in this removal standards and the controversy around it, they wanted to see potentially maybe some fresh people in the methodological expert panel that was really working on the standards, who built the standards, and potentially maybe also supervisory body. But in the end, nothing really changed. The term limits will be checked for supervisory body.
So how long? 2 years?
Later on. Yeah, they can be in place for 2 years. So nothing changed. Basically, the decisions that we had in place earlier were not opened up, which is a great thing. But it's just these were the developments behind which removals, for sure, kind of played some role in the background.
Yeah.
And then some other important parts, of course, that were relevant for Article 6, like the funding of the supervisory body work and the transfer of CDM. But there were, I would say, from the cover decision, 2 things that could be very relevant for removals depending on how they move forward is the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belém mission to 1.5 degrees. We don't really know what this is, even like how different they will be, because both have to do with implementing NDCs, really. But I guess there's a food for thought for many to think whether and how to maybe bring in removals in these processes.
Yeah, there was a bit of a panic
then
on the Article 6 stuff, like right at the beginning of the second week. We're like, there isn't supposed to be any Article 6 stuff. And then suddenly people were like, this could be really bad. And then it turned out to not be, really anything more than, more administrative stuff. But yeah, there was a moment of where that seemed to be a kind of a sneaky big thing that might come out and not necessarily benefit us.
If we go like right from the nitty-gritty details of kind of term limits for supervisory body members to kind of sticking to 1.5, because you mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but maybe we can expand on that. My understanding is the more COP sticks to 1.5 and recognizes overshoot, the bigger the role for carbon removals has
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So how did this play out at COP?
I mean, for people like us who've been doing this for years, we're like, it's coming. You know what I mean? Like, again, just being very realistic about it. And then, but it is interesting how it changes the imagination when it's upon us. That it really forefronts the idea of overshoot and gives CDR this very heroic role. And it also has happened at a point like if we did this 8 years ago when global warming 1.5C, when CDR was just a scary graph, people would be looking at it like, I don't know how we're going to do that. But now we have all of these forms of CDR happening in all these interesting ways around the world where when you say, oh, wow, we got to do this to get back to 1.5C or to say that, and then you can point to all these amazing things, it just has a lot more charisma to it than it did even like a couple of years ago. And so I find that people, rather than me being the weird CDR guy trying to like pop into things, you could just sort of feel it in the air that people had genuine interest and say, all right, we better get going on that, and that's not what we're used to, right? And that's starting to happen. So it's hard to put my finger on exactly it. It was like a tone shift, I think, is really what I felt.
But it was still not enough to get into final declaration, right? Like I'm wondering, like, were there specific countries that tried to push for kind of removals in there? How do you see that?
Eve will probably know better than I do. Even I'm trying to catch up on it because my head was so buried. I mean, there was the Article 6 Ambition Alliance that did launch as well on the 21st as part of the action agenda that Swiss led. That's a big deal. That's the Expanding Ambition Beyond Article 6 Alliance. And in their little declaration, they specifically mentioned carbon removal. And it was Switzerland with 8 other countries that led it. I know the guy who, led that pretty well, but now I'm looking at like, well, what are the next steps? Because that could be actually a big thing from the action agenda that is actually, has an impact on CDR and Article 6 as well. I don't know if you read about that, Eva.
Actually, coming back to Sebastian's question, it's this implicit versus explicit coverage of CDR. Like for quite some years, those following CDR and following the negotiations, they could just say, well, all of this is also about removals because it's about climate change mitigation that inherently includes reductions and removals. I think some feel like if we start bringing up different solutions separately, then you will have people working on other solutions who want to have theirs mentioned. Although we could say that, well, it's just reductions versus removals, but then you have people working on nuclear or hydrogen or carbon capture, and then you end up with Christmas trees that start mentioning all kinds of things, and suddenly, maybe something is still left out, and then, well, does it mean something? So there's I think there's some fear around that if you start because historically, if you think about how removals have been mentioned in some of these negotiation items, they have never been mentioned really in general. We've had, I remember a couple of COPs ago, text specifically about removals in the oceans context or removals mentioned next to CCS, which is, so it has really come up kind of in a patchwork way, which is also not great at all. So I think through the work that we see happening now through you, Chris, hopefully it's kind of go mainstream that when removals are brought up, it's not just one or the other solution. We talk about all removals. And I'm not sure about how much the Article 6 Alliance will be doing on removals, but I wanted to bring up another initiative that I noticed, the Blue NDC Challenge, where also potential removals could fit in. Again, obviously, a specific subset of removals. But now that it's all about implementing the NDCs, I'm curious, who is working globally on helping governments understand how to mainstream removals into their NDCs? Like, do you know?
I think it's
I've been
going to be
asking this question
us.
for years now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying this facetiously, as I think it's, it's us, right? But we've started to have really influence. I mean, stuff I look at too is really important measures in terms of adding credibility and mainstream is, Johan Rockström, 2 days before the Guardian article comes out, Christiana Figueres, 6 weeks before, giving the most full-throated, this is my journey into CDR, this is why we have to do it, so we have to do it now. So we're starting to get that, this sort of the elder class of, people that have the highest sort of prestige and trust levels talking about this out loud. And that then makes it easier for others. And those are the ones we need. But I think the patchwork part, I'm not surprised by that. We could work it to our advantage as well. You kind of want it to be this thing that inhabits other stuff. I know I always say that. And that there was never such a it can pop up in many ways. And if you show people specific instances of how carbon removal works within their orbit of concern, that does the heavy lifting on them understanding the bigger picture. And that's where having a lot of those things take place. I don't know how it'll play out, but I think it just puts us in a much more comfortable position to get, acceptance.
Chris, looking ahead, hoping that you're going to stay in your position, but
Me too.
how do we set up carbon removal for success for the next COP? Like, given what you've just lived through and experienced, what would be like if you had a magic wand and you infinite resources for carbon removal, what would you want for the next COP so that we can just build on what you did this year and deliver even more?
Yeah, I mean, I have to give an enormous amount of credit. I work with so many awesome people within those activation groups, but the Climate Champions team were just fantastic in terms of me talking to them and being genuinely curious and then passing it along to somebody else. That went 100 million times better than what I expected, just being a veteran of carbon removal. And that work has already been done in certain key areas. I focused on agriculture with Brazil because of the biochar, the ERW opportunity, and the ag. I was like, I had to pick, where do I think I'm going to get the greatest sort of penetration to do this? And I think in hindsight, that was a good idea. Then the key is to carry forward that Muchirao I talked about with more and more people and create these neighborhoods or these boxes that are designed to try to get people to focus on what is the ambitious thing that they're able to show or announce at the next COP, and to keep carrying that over. But you have to look at the country that's hosting it. And we're in a really interesting position here because you have this weird, kind of unprecedented, I think, merger of Australia, and that brings in one of the most CDR forward states. And they had a prioritization where they wanted to make it the oceanic, small island nations, and negotiated that. That has to be there. This is where 1.5C is the most existential. So you can ensure that goes through, and that means carbon removal will be a bigger part of it. But Turkey is one that people didn't know a lot about, and I've read their NDC, I read their ETS law over the weekend. There's a lot there in terms of what's actually in their existing policy. They have removals in their ETS law that passed last year. It's very unspecified. And then they have enormous opportunities to do various forms of CDR, both in agriculture. They're a top 8 agriculture, top 8 cement and concrete. The prime minister's wife is a huge climate champion herself. You know what I mean? So you just have to immediately look at carrying over, but look at the local conditions at the place where you're going to go. And you use those as your ways in. You don't just create something from scratch. So I think we should really focus. Imagine if we had a global coalition around ocean CDR that we really work on. It's both states and non-state actors. What if we take the building materials thing, huge building and construction sector in that, and finally say, let's make this a thing, and then add 2 new ways that people are like, whoa, you could do CDR through that next to agriculture and that, So we have to think about it. We also have to really work together on this. And that was what I was hoping by creating those open spaces to that. One is that there's a destination where people can kind of come in and create a network of networks that people who make decisions in private sector and business and industry are exposed to that and are only one click away from talking to you, Sebastian, about, feedstocks for biochar and how that really, you know what I mean? Let's just collapse the world, put it all into one place. And that is going to, we know this from history, it's just, that is absolutely going to accelerate learning and implementation. So a lot of this, we'll see how it shakes out, but I feel pretty goddamn good about it, to be honest with you. I think we can do some stuff. I think we're not going back.
Great energy. I love it.
Great ending.
Yeah,
We're not going back,
ending.
God damn it. No, So,
Excellent. All right.
Great.
We're up on time. This was great. And I mean, thank you once again for representing CDR, keeping up the good fight, and for joining us on the show again today. This was really insightful. Thank you.
It was great.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Really
so
appreciate
much.
it. Come back anytime.
Bye. Bye, Chris.